The white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor. In this political football game, the white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Black Radicals. This is our 11th episode, and today we're joined by my close friend and comrade, Mohamed Abdou, to talk about his important book, Islam and Anarchism. What Mohamed offers in this interview is more than just a perspective, but a history, connected and cascading theories, critique, analysis, and philosophy. I am sure many listeners would take from this conversation different things, but one important take is how to understand Islam beyond the racist depictions we are bombarded with every day by the media. Especially these days, as the media is ramping up its anti-Muslim racism following the tragic incident during Pride in Berlin. You can follow Mohamed Abdou on Instagram or get his book, Islam and Anarchism, through Pluto's website, with the links I would provide in the show notes. If you find this conversation interesting, I highly recommend Mohamed's work, which I have personally found to be very inspiring. With that being said, we start today's conversation with the bastardization of the concept of jihad. So, enjoy. Don't forget to subscribe and like our podcast. What does jihad mean, and what you mean by a greater jihad? Because I think as soon as the general population hear the word jihad, it's almost it's like a freak reaction towards it. But of course, this is not what it means in Arabic or Islam. But can you tell us what you mean by it, and how should we understand it?
Right. Linguistically, theologically speaking, Islamically speaking, historically speaking, even materially speaking, and I'll try and ground it as well in terms of the contemporary context of particularly Palestine, if that's okay. Jihad literally comes from the word jahada, jim ha da, but most Arabic words can be traced to 3-letter roots. Most of them tend to be verbs. Jihad means to struggle. Now, the struggle can be applied to an infinite number of struggles, because struggle for what? Well, the Prophet had classified at least 2 types of jihad, at least 2 types, right? Alayhi salatu salam, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the greater jihad, he said, the struggle against oneself. Why? Because we as a species, we covet, and we lust for power, we lust for wealth, we lust for more children, we lust and we have an insatiable appetite. We tend to see desire is coming from a place of lack. Freud talked to that, but actually desire comes from a place of productivity, as Deleuze and Guattari would argue. The French constructionist philosophers Joseph Deleuze and Felix Guattari would argue, or have argued, in Anti-Oedipus, 1,000 Platos. So it's constantly trying to ward off our selfish desires, our individualist desires, right? To look for and to build towards, opposite to that narcissism, connectivity, interconnectivity, relationality. How I can privilege my sibling, my kin, my neighbor over myself, over my wants, over my whims. Because the devil, if you will, or shaitan, doesn't necessarily opposite. The choice is not always between sort of good and evil, right? Sometimes it's between the lesser good and the better good. Right. So, for instance, I have $5 in my pocket, and I see somebody who's houseless or homeless, right? And it's just like, okay, well, the shaitan can come and say, oh, well, you need that money, just keep it to yourself. So I'll pretend that homeless person doesn't exist. So that's a choice between good and evil. I could have shared a little bit, but I decided not to, and pretended that homeless person didn't even exist, right? And I kept on walking, going. Or I see a woman being assaulted, or there are sexist acts towards her, or somebody's being racist towards an immigrant. There are a myriad of different examples of that, right? But then there's another kind of jihad, right? Where it's just like, this is the kind of jihad that again, so far as the duality of the shaitan, that, okay, well, give that homeless person like $1. You need $4 for yourself from the $5. Okay. Okay, so that's good, but is there a better good? Yeah, absolutely. The better good would be like, okay, let me give half, let me give more than half, let me give everything, because I can get those $5 somewhere else, or Allah will provide. Allah has given, and Allah will provide again. I'm in a more privileged situation to support this person. So this is why the Quran will even describe people who give, that they give with their right hand, such that their left hand doesn't know what they have given. So it is that extendedness, right? Or connecting with non-human life, the animals, the plants, really being at one with the other than non-human life, because they are tribes and nations, as we've spoken before, but and as Islam teaches. So that's the greater kind of jihad, right? The constant struggle against one's inner microfascisms, especially in this day and age, we're socialized by the nation state. They teach us how to be authoritarian, how to be power hungry, if you will. And capitalism materializes all our relations, right? So we learn how to materialize all our relations, how to individualize, how to become authoritarian, also from capitalism. But capitalism acts as the mother, if you will, as I describe psychologically speaking in the book. And she teaches us to be selfish that way. So the greater jihad then is fighting and struggling against those inner microfascisms, the selfishness, the authoritarianism, the materialism, the authoritarianness, the judgmentalness that we have towards one another, right? I meet you on the street, or you're black, I'm brown. Okay, I figured you out. I asked you your name, where you're born, where you're this and that, what you do for a living. And that's it. I'm not bound by any particular relationship. But jihad means if we're truly siblings, if we're truly compas, comrades, if we're truly community, we need to invest in all our relations. We need to invest in getting to know one another, including the stereotypes that we've internalized of one another that way. Right? That's where we started off the conversation with. So we have to take time. That's a form of jihad. Take time from the materialization of time in life, because capitalism commodifies again everything. So to take time to visit one another, to cook with one another, to embark in a politics of hospitality, what is referred to in Islam as usul al-diyafa, in a politics of even disagreements, because there will be disagreements, and the most blessed of relations doesn't know disagreements, because how else are friendships to grow but through disagreements? Disagreements don't necessarily have to cause shiqaq or dissension. They can, but they don't have to, right? Especially when people share mutual ethical, political, social justice commitments and orientations, etc. So that's the greater jihad. The smaller jihad, which is this is what the Prophet referred to, is defensive jihad, which is fighting with the sword, right? So the right to self-defense. God forbid, now if somebody comes and threatens you and me, we have a right to self-defend ourselves. The doctrine, Muslims initially during the nascent period were actually forbidden from defending themselves. We were persecuted, we were murdered, we were tortured. Families were torturing their own children, parents, their own children. There are narrations in which Muslims were being placed in the desert sun of the Arabian Peninsula with hot coal being placed on their chest, so that they may recant or leave Islam. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade Muslims from fighting back, because that was already part of the culture, of Arabic culture. And it was arguably part of any culture, because if somebody slaps you, the inclination is to slap them back, right? Or to at least get violent back. Okay. But that wasn't the lesson that Muslims needed to learn. They needed to learn how to become a community, because the loyalty was to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The loyalty was to be to the ethical, political, social justice commitments that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded. Care for the poor, women, elderly, children, the dispossessed, the disabled, and so on and so forth. Center them. They are the closest to God. They are the meek of the earth. They are the salt of the earth, right? They are the below. They are the oppressed, right? So it was to form a new community and to abandon any kind of tribal loyalty or nationalist loyalty or racial loyalty or ethnic loyalty or any other kind of loyalty, right? Arabia at the time was a tribal society. You had big tribes. They took care of the smaller tribes, but still there were differences in terms of class and power relations. There was femicide. Women were being buried alive, because a lot of Arabs or whatever for the shame would have women as children, but at the same time, you have Khadija, which is the first, she was the first wife of the Prophet, and she was one of the wealthiest women in Mecca. So you have contradictions like that exist in any society. But the point being is that when Islam came, right, again, it didn't come with do this and don't do that. It came to instill certain limits of of justice, and to think and to cause the individual to think critically, right? And this became the idea. So Muslims had to migrate. They first migrated to Abyssinia, modern Ethiopia, under the protection of King Vengeance, who was a Christian king. He later became Muslim on his deathbed, or he later became Muslim, sorry, prior even his deathbed. And then, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad, then later on to Medina, which is within the Arabian, right? So they engaged in two migrations, right? But the point being, they were forbidden from fighting. Until the verse was revealed, that again, I'm not going to get into the details. The book discusses this, and Muslim history is very clear with regard to this. That the assault that is coming from the polytheists, but from the despotic rulers of Mecca, would not subsist. They kept on attacking Muslims, despite the fact that Muslims had treaties with them. But the Meccans would break the treaties with them continuously, over and over and over again. Right? They even one of the treaties had stipulated, for instance, certain contractual agreements. As for instance, if a Muslim decides to no longer become a Muslim again and they decide to return to Mecca, that the Meccans could keep this person and the Muslims had no right to this person. So the Prophet said that's fine. But they said that if a Meccan became a Muslim, then they would have to return that Muslim back to them. There are so many unjust stipulations within that particular agreement were unfair. Muslims were only allowed to perform pilgrimage after a certain amount of time to visit, because this was part of their ritual of worship, to visit Mecca, right? So the Quraysh, which is the leading tribe in Arabia, said, well, you can only come and do this pilgrimage after a certain amount of time, right? So they made so many hurdles. Even the companions of the Prophet said, how can you be signing this agreement? But the Prophet said, no, Allah teaches us that we need to honor contracts. Yeah. So the emphasis is always on the honoring of contracts. But when they kept on breaking the contracts over and over and over again, then there became the right to self-defense, right? Because they wouldn't heed, they wouldn't stop, because their problem wasn't the fact that they were willing to, okay, Islam says there's no compulsion in religion. You have your faith, I have mine. Fine. You don't want to disbelieve, or you don't believe in Islam. That's your choice, of course. Everybody is entitled to choose their paths, and there are many paths towards creation, right? But then leave us alone. Don't intervene and don't engage in violence against us. But when you oppress us, this is when the verse was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That كُتِبَ الْقِتَالُ عَلَيْكُمْ, and war has been written about to you, although it is disliked to you. Allah acknowledges in this verse, and I talk about this, that nobody should like war, and Allah doesn't like war, and any human being does not like war. But Allah says that war is now written because, and Allah again is speaking to the reader of the Quran and getting them to think for themselves, which is, would you be okay for your people, your community, your family to continue to be oppressed without end? You migrated and you died. You tried to sign treaties with the enemy and they still wouldn't leave you alone. So are you supposed to just accept oppression? Are you supposed to continue to accept the theft of your land, rape, pillaging, injustice against you? And so Allah says, well, then in this circumstance, war is decreed and you are permitted to go to war. But the initial lesson, and hence the smaller jihad, but I want to come back to this point in a second. But the initial lesson is, how do you foment community? How do you foment a community that gets to know one another? That's the greater jihad, because that's hard. Just because you and I call ourselves leftists or Marxists or anarchists, that does not mean that we will necessarily get along. We need to get to know one another. Maybe our way of living and our lifestyles is different. Maybe, again, be living together and we'll argue over the dishes and over how clean the place is and my rights versus your rights, as opposed to our responsibilities, right? You may have a child. I may be a single person. I want to party late at night. I consider that part of my freedom. How can I not do that? Meanwhile, you have a child that, is going to be waking up in the middle of the night. She has maternal, paternal needs, and so on and so forth, right? So build a community is not easy, because that means we reveal the monsters that we've internalized of one another to one another. We lean on each other with our full weight. We take things for granted. So it is about learning how to foment community, how to build together, which is not easy. So this is why the greater jihad is so important. The smaller jihad, this is now the problem, that the smaller jihad, when it is used in the defensive sense, then the word is qital, to fight. That is the actual word for fight. Because not all qital is jihad and not all jihad is qital. Let me explain. Qital means to fight. It's the literal word to fight. So when the West or your America says, oh, these Muslims, they want to engage in jihad. It's true because, yeah, we are a people that believe in unity and the greater jihad. Of course, what they mean is they just want to engage in terrorism all the time. Okay. Of course, terrorism is a different word. It's irhab. That's part of the Orientals. But qital is the actual word for battle. What I mean by not all forms of qital or jihad is one can go battle. That doesn't mean that they're performing an act of jihad. And in that case, it would be a form of terror. For instance, is what ISIS was doing as far as other Muslims and slaughtering our own Muslims, which is a Muslim community, majority of whom ISIS had killed. And they were supported by, of course, the imperialist forces, the US, and Zionists, and so on. But the majority that they killed were your Americans know they were actually Muslims and they were Sunni Muslims. They even killed members of Al-Qaeda because they considered them to be too soft in comparison to what the interpretation of Islam that they followed, Daesh followed, or ISIS followed. I mean, is that then jihad? Of course not. But they were engaged in qital. They were engaged. I mean, this is what the word literally means in Arabic. So that's why I say not all qital is jihad. And not all jihad is qital, because you can engage in jihad, the greater jihad, without engaging in actual physical, right? Defensive. Of course, scholars have interpreted that there are other forms of jihad, but those are the two main forms of jihad. There are other forms of jihad al-qalb, right? The jihad al-lisan, the jihad or the struggle of the heart, the struggle of the tongue. That when you see, for instance, injustice in front of you, the least is change, or you try to change it with your hand. If you can't change it with your hand, then you change it with your tongue. If you can't change it with your tongue, then you change it with your heart, right? So again, there are so many different layers to jihad, but those are the two major forms of jihad: the greater jihad, smaller jihad, and both are necessary. Look at the context of Palestine. We're going on 80 years, 100 years, actually 533 years, as we discussed, because this war, racial religious war on Islam and Muslims, goes back to 1492. And we can, I can go back and mention that, but we talked about it on the other. But this is jihad.
Teasing out what you said about jihad, can we link it to how do you understand the compatibility between, or maybe not compatibility, might not be a smart use of word, but the relationship between anarchism and Islam?
You know, one of the words that are, and again, this is the problem of talking about jihad, just to continue with that thread. The first thing that the Prophet, peace be upon him, was told when the angel Gabriel, of course, we are the Prophet's ummah, the Prophet's community. That's what we are as Muslims. We are the ummah of the illiterate. He was an illiterate man. He could not read, he could not write. And the first thing that he was told, and this is why the Quran was a miracle, this is a man who could not read and he could not write. So how can he come up with such a beautiful text that is filled with metaphors and parables and stories and poeticism? And how could that be, right? Let alone verses that nobody knows the meaning of, because there are verses in the Quran known as al-ghayb, the unknown. For example, chapter number 2 in the Quran, the chapter of the cow, begins with the letters alif, lam, mim. Alif is a letter, lam is a letter, mim is a letter, but it doesn't formulate an Arabic word. Nobody knows what this word means. Al-ghayb. And it is said, or scholars have understood it, and this is, one can do jihad with regards to this, or ijtihad with regards to this. There's another word. Ijtihad is an extension of jihad, which means to engage in critical reasoning, right? So, and thought and reflection and introspection. But the point being, one can go do jihad or ijtihad with regards to this verse, this al-ghayb verse, alif lam mim, but they will never understand the meaning of it because it isn't an Arabic word. Only Allah knows the meaning and the Prophet, and He never revealed what the meaning is. And it's meant to humble Arabs or humble any reader as to their own language and their own grasp, right? There are more blank spaces on a page. This is why people read Marx over and over and again every single time they discover something, right? When you read a text, you discover things. So imagine now an entire faith, let alone a book of faith, religion, right? But the point is, the first thing that the Prophet was told was "Iqra thumma iqra thumma," read and read and read. And my point is, reading is a form of jihad, because it's very important for us to learn and undo again the stereotypes, and that we're there's constantly manufacturing of consent. There's the constant, propaganda that we are all exposed to in relationship to one another, the divide and conquer that we've internalized. And how can we build community? How can fight for liberation? How can we even engage in resistance without understanding who the genuine enemy is and what we're fighting for in terms of a battle? If we don't have an agreement about that, then we'll never achieve liberation. But so part of what needs to be undone is the definition of Islam and anarchism, because anarchism is generally mistranslated as chaos, as anarchy. It's in the English, right? Or it means disorder and no rules. And anarchism is the opposite of that. Anarchism means a shift towards a politics of responsibility from a politics of rights. The state is defined vis-a-vis a politics of rights, right? Of course, the state as a product is a product of your American modernity. It begins to emerge in 1492 alongside with capitalism. 1492 is very important, again, just to shed a little bit of light on why that's important. It's when Muslims and Jews were evicted from Spain, from Al-Andalus. Muslims and Jews were referred to as savages and heathens. And then Columbus goes and engages in the conquest of Turtle Island. The US, Canada, genocides 100 million people, engages in transatlantic slavery. A fifth of the transatlantic Middle Passage Black siblings of ours from Africa are Muslims. Okay, this is just a side note, but 1492 then becomes very important. We talked about it in the other recording. But okay, so anarchism means taking up responsibility that capitalism and that the nation state, as myths, have presumed to take on our behalf as a means of organizing, ordering in modern and civilized and progressive ways our worlds that are supposed to be better, that are supposed to be more luxurious. I mean, the myth of capitalism is, we're going to put you within a 9-to-5 job. You're going to have a boss. You're going to work at a power plant so that you can have more money in order to enjoy more luxury and more privilege in the world. We're going to build you a washing machine instead of you washing the clothes. We're going to build you a microwave or have you a microwave instead of you cooking over the fire, right? So you can have more leisure time, more time for yourself. But we know that that's a myth. That is not completely true, because capitalism is based on endless consumption, of course, it's based on a lot of different things. Indentured servitude, exploitation of our labor, it's based on interest, so there are many manifestations. And the state merely acts as a godlike intervention figure because, the state is a form of religion. Capitalism is a form of religion. God we trust on the dollar bill. But the state, its role, like I said, is daddy, is to act as an intermediary to intervene between you and I. We get into a car accident, you have to call the police and the insurance company, capitalism, and the police forces, the state forces, in order to come and mitigate the disagreement between you and I, as if you and I can't resolve our disagreements. Of course, when you come to places like Egypt or other places, if you get into a car accident and you tell somebody, I'm going to call the police or the insurance company, people would laugh at you. Because usually people resolve differences even if they shout and they scream at one another, and then people come down from a neighborhood and they separate the people and they try and talk some sense into the situation because people are upset or angry or whatever, somebody who's being careless or who was just a mere accident, right? But this is what I mean. The state comes and constantly intervenes because the state acts as this authoritarian godlike trigger. It assumes, again, that we can't organize ourselves. And hence, anarchism is, if you will, Marxism, but with a critical take on understanding of power and how power has been arranged in modernity and what the nation state actually does, right? Because power is fluid. It's fluid between you and me right now. It's dynamic. It's not institutionalized. You've kindly invited me on your show. I accepted. We're sitting down. If you don't like what I'm saying, you can disagree. If there's something that I need to clarify, you can ask. If I'm being an ungracious guest, then you can kick me off your show or say I'm not going to air this. You have power. I have power to say what I want. You have power to respond to that. It's a dynamic process, right? We're not bound by some kind of institution or bureaucracy. You're not the president of the nation. It's none of that. Even you, as a gracious host, I'm sure at a certain point will come and say, well, here's the recording, you listen to it, I've edited it, I've done this, I've done that. That's what you do. It's even if you do have quote unquote full creative control, right? But nonetheless, there's an element of mutual aid that is associated with a responsibility that is bound by ethics and politics and spirituality, etc. But really justice. But the point being is that that's what the state does. So anarchists are critical. We're Marxists, but we're also critical of power too, right? Particularly with the emergence of the modern world. So the actual then word that is used in Arabic to describe anarchism is Fawdawiyya, right? Mm-hmm. Which literally means chaos and anarchy, etc. But as Hibara of Izzat, as I have written, the actual word is La Sultawiyya, which means without authority. Now, being without authority does not mean that there's no leadership, but we're all leaders. We're all in what Islam refers to as khulafa. We're all caretakers of one another. There isn't a need for a single person, and even if there is a leader, they are to execute the decisions of the community. They are not one that makes a decision on behalf of the community. They are simply somebody who executes that decision. That the community arrives to be what in Islam, what in anarchism is mutual shura, which is mutual consultation, right? This is consensus building, even dissensus building in terms of respecting disagreements, right? Depending on whether the decision we're making is strategic or tactical, right? There is the element of maslaha in Islam, which is, the public welfare or community's welfare. There's the ijma', which means community consensus. There you go. You begin to see practices in Islam, in anarchism that ground and also help with the greater jihad. Why? Because if I engage in mutual consultation with you, I'm humbling my ego. I'm opening you up and vice versa to my world, to problems that exist in my life, right? And so we're beginning to share. We're digging at a much more deeper level in each other's circumstances and day-to-day conditions, material conditions, than having the state or capitalism mitigate that for us. Okay. So it's also based on the understanding that although we are caretakers or khulafa, that they're supposed to organize according to shura, ijma', maslaha, right? That there is no person to be deified, to be placed. Of course, we all have different levels of charisma. I appreciate Che as much as Fidel, etc. But there's a difference in character. Che was somebody who was a revolutionary up until his last breath. Fidel's revolutionary impulse became sort of static because he became a statesman, right? He was no longer a revolutionary of the below. He's a revolutionary of the above and to the left. If we use the logic of the Zapatistas, that means he still subscribed to a world of nation states. I mean, Cuba is a modern nation state, like other nation states. It was produced as a consequence of colonialism and imperialism. If you go about 500 years, is there Cuba? No, there wasn't. So this is the irony. If we're talking about decolonization, we have to look, are there alternate forms of governance beyond the nation state that the white man, that Europe invented? We all agree that capitalism is a product of modernity, colonialism, and is a product of white, again, colonialism and imperialism. But we never want to question, or at least a great deal of Marxists, even Black and indigenous, they never really want to dig deeper into the question of indigenous sovereignty, of Black self-determination beyond the nation state. Of course, we do have Black anarchisms, we do have indigenous anarchisms, we do have all kinds of anarchisms, including spiritual anarchisms, that do go into these taboo territories. But until recently, Black anarchism was not considered to be a part of the Black radical tradition, or at least not taken seriously. Despite that, you have that a lot of former Black Panthers that were Marxist-Leninists, because that's what the Panthers were imprisoned and had to revise. Mm-hmm. They were critical of vanguardist politics. They were critical of the hierarchy, of Marxist-Leninism, of that kind of Black Marxism, right? And so they came out, Ashanti Elston, who's my elder, I've known him for 35 years, Lorenzo Irvin, there are a lot that then began to say, well, no, wait a second. I think anarchism is more suitable to the way that Black, indigenous people of color would describe our way of being in the world, right? In terms of orientation, because then we're able to identify, okay, the enemy, because I said, if we don't have a consensus about who the enemy is, then we don't know what we're fighting, then we don't know how to achieve liberation. Is the enemy just capitalism? Is the enemy just the nation state? these are matters of importance because they say and they lay a foundation. If I say that, oh, it's racial capitalism, and of course, all capitalism is racial. Ruthie Gilmore Wilson, all this is all and good, right? But Fred Martin and all that, all this is good. It goes back to Stokely Carmichael, to Kwame Ture, excuse me, to Patrice Lumumba, to Nkrumah, to Sankara. They all identified fine. But capitalism also has a relationship with the state, and it's a historical one and imperial one, and they may share short-term velocities, but their long-term strategic interests are the same. So if you think that capitalism is the only problem and we just need to defeat capitalism, well, then we're likely not going to be able to build together because you don't see the state as the enemy. Because your strategy then is either to take over that state and to make a Marxist-Leninist project out of it, or a revolution that somehow is going to defeat imperialism, which is the high state of capitalism. Well, how? You can't do that. It hasn't worked even at the height of Pan-Arabism, Pan-Africanism, even at the height of the Third World movements. No, we don't even have that. We're not even remotely close to that. They weren't able to do that because it was using the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. You can't. And it denies, again, indigenous forms of sovereignty. So this is, or of governance that are alternative to the nation state. This is what I find useful within anarchism, the critique of power, on top of course, from Marxism, the critique of capitalism and materialism, but it definitely includes both. But that's anarchism. The other thing, and of course, there's the element of, I meant to say that in Islam, the primary principle that we believe to, the tenet of belief is tawheed, which means that I only worship God. If I pledge allegiance to the nation state, then that's a contradiction in loyalty. Because am I fighting in the name of the nation state or in the name of Allah and the social justice commandments that Allah commands me that commands me? What if the nation state I'm fighting for is an unjust one? Look at America. Look at how many Muslims pledge allegiance to America. You know, the thing, and I'll say this is a time to return to Islam for a moment. This is what Iran and this is what Hezbollah, and I mentioned this before, are realizing right now. You cannot maintain loyalty towards the nation state, the Iranian state, the Lebanese state, without contradicting your ultimate goal. For Muslims, it's the Ummah, and the Ummah is an anti-statist concept. What is an Ummah? It is building a borderless world, not just for Muslims, for all believers. What binds these believers together? Spiritual, ethical, political commitments. What is the believer in Islam? Because the Quran primarily relies on the category of the believer. The word for believer in Quran is Muslim, or is mu'min, sorry. The word Muslim is only used 4 or 5 times. But the believer, the term is mu'min. Okay. The mu'min is the person that does not corrupt in the earth, that does not engage in israf or waste, which is a pillar of capitalism. Tabzir, waste, that does not engage in interest, because riba, interest is riba in Islam, it's the exploitation of the poor. Does not think that they possess everything, because al-mulk, or property, everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you begin to see, again, not only on capitalist sort of commitments or in ethics, but again, set of commitments, social justice, ethical, political, that define the believer, whether that believer is a Muslim or a Buddhist or Zoroastrian or Christian or Jewish or whatever. There are many Muslims that are Zionists. This is why it's very important to realize that the believer, or the category of believer, is more important, because it helps to even clarify if a Muslim is being hypocritical. There are many Muslims who say that they follow Islam, but they don't. Look at the Arabian Peninsula nations. They're Zionists, they're imperialists, they're colonialists. They are tools in the hands of their masters, the Americans, the UAE, and so on and so forth, and they trust the genocide that is complicit in Sudan and Congo and so on. So Islam also has been, the actual translation then, to go back to that point of anarchism, is la sultan, without authority. That does not mean that we don't have organizing, and that does not mean that we don't even have leaders. But these leaders, again, are not in any kind of way institutionalized. They are not in any way rulers, and they are ones that can change, can shift from one moment to another to become somebody else. Now, Islam, I want to shift that, has also been mistranslated. It has been mistranslated as submission, right? And this is a wrong translation, because the word submission in Arabic is khudu', which is a completely different word. Islam comes from the root sallama, willfully deliver, to deliver upon choice, right? By willingness. And so it means willful surrender, right? So it's to surrender to Allah and Allah's principles and the way that Allah commands one should live based on willful choice. The reason that it's mistranslated submission by Muslims and non-Muslims is to, and even anarchists internalize this perception of Muslims and Marxists too, is to give the impression, it's a very Orientalist thing, to give the impression that Muslims aren't rational thinkers, that we don't think. That Islam is just a religion, and it's just the opiate of the masses, that people are just drunken, they're drunken super following this God that they have never seen and that has never spoken to them. Right? It's very funny that the last few days, people are going off with regards to Richard Hawkins and him speaking to an AI machine called, I think Claudia, he named her, and the fact that he has determined that she has a consciousness, but he refuses to engage the question of God. But this is part of the problem, right? A lot of overnight anarchists or Marxists or leftists generally come from white European backgrounds, and they have specific experiences with the Catholic Church, with Protestantism, and they forget that Christianity is an Eastern tradition, and they forget that they don't know much about Islam, and they don't know much about Judaism, which is also traditionally an Eastern tradition before it was appropriated by Zionism. But they forget that they're following one interpretation of Christianity, that they don't actually have an understanding of real Christianity as Eastern Christians understand it. But anyways, so Islam means to willfully deliver, to deliver upon choice. Now, why is that important, and how does it relate further to anarchism? Like I said, because there is the concept or the verse that la ikraha fi din, there's no compulsion in faith, in religion. And Islam is constantly in the Quran. Allah is constantly asking Muslims, do they not think, do they not reflect? Now, Tawheed in Islam, which I referred to earlier, belief in a single God, means that Allah possesses all the sovereignty, and the manifestation of that sovereignty is through the concept of ummah, which is an anti-statist and non-statist concept. Again, I said that the goal of Muslims, or at least the Islam that I believe in, is to build a world where all worlds fit, where it doesn't matter, if you will, whether you're a Jew or a Christian or this or that. What matters is the set of spiritual, ethical, political commitments that you believe in. Why spiritual? Because even if you're somebody who says, I don't believe in God, well, you need some kind of spiritual orientation. Why? Because ultimately the land is a spiritual subject. She's not an object. She gives us the air that we breathe, the food that we eat. So we need to, if you want to connect with the land truly, then you have to have some kind of spiritual orientation, whatever your choice is, but you have to have a spiritual orientation, right? And we are soulful beings. How can you love without spirit? How can you engage in anything without spirit? So taking out the question of spirit and secularism and so on is also problematic, because secularism emerged out of your American Enlightenment project, and that still preserves its Christian ethos. It's a facade, and it only can manifest in the context of a state. So if we agree that no states, okay, that capitalism is a religion, that the state is a religion, that one has to have some kind of spiritual orientation. So the ummah is formed of believers who share spiritual, ethical, political commitments in terms of orientation. But then power in Islam is also fluid, because Jihad al-Akbar would make no sense. Shura would make no sense. Mutual consultation would make no sense. Ijma', community consensus, would make no sense. Maslaha, public welfare, would make no sense if we are not organized in a lateral way. Even within Islam, the person that we pray 5 times a day, the person that leads prayers, it's not necessarily the same person every single time. The community that is praying behind that person has to give consent that they are going to be praying behind that person. That person is going to lead them in this prayer. And they have to repeat this consensus every single time the community prays. What if they discover that this person is a thief? What if they discover that this person is a misogynist or is a racist or whatever? They have a right to remove this person, even if this person knows the entire Quran, even if they memorize the whole Quran, even if they appear as a pious person. Well, appearance is one thing, and what is inside is another. So if you even think about it, that organizing ourselves laterally helps expose ourselves to one another. the naked truths of ourselves. I could say, or I can appear as a good Muslim. I could appear as a good anarchist who picks up trash that they see on the streets, because these are public streets and they are Allah streets and they belong to the community. And I try to leave it for just a garbage collector to come and pick it up. A garbage collector that is on a low-paying salary from a state or a corporation, because again, the responsibility is spread out. But if you and I are walking and I pick up that garbage, you don't know whether I'm picking it up because I really care about the environment, care about God and justice and so on and so forth, or whether I'm picking it up because of my ego, because I want you to think that I'm somebody who cares about the environment, or because I want you to praise me out loud. You see, the ego, the Jihad al-Akbar, the fight against that ego. How else would you know unless we are living one another? We are dealing daily with one another. We're exposing ourselves not so that we can bring each other down, but so we can lift each other up. Because you believe in the best of me, and I believe in the best of you. But that can't happen if, again, the nation state divides us and segregates us according to race and according to class and according to gender and according to district and according to age and according to profession, and treats us differently because it is our words. And again, for the sake of a political leader or political party to be elected, the state functions on the lowest common denominator of constituents that it can bring together in order to vote in an election in favor of a leader or political party. The US. What percentage of the US votes? 50, 60% do not, 50%, more than 50% don't vote. What kind of democracy? It's a settler colony. People are disillusioned, right? With this notion of, like I said, voting. So especially voting isn't harm reduction in the context of stolen land, in the context of the US. So to go back to your question, and hopefully maybe to wrap things up, what I see between Islam and anarchism are synchronities that way in terms of the understandings of the fluidity of power, but also the critique of the material qualities of life that we as a species could be prone to. I want a bigger house. I want more children. I want to one up the other. I want to dominate the other. A significant other that I'm married to because she's a woman, and I want to assert my patriarchy and my misogyny and my way, and I am the man, and so on and so forth kind of mentality. I mean, you were saying earlier, right, that we were talking earlier, it's hard to make or to have a community. Yeah, can you imagine if two people struggle living with one another as a partnership, right, in a monogamous relationship? Can we imagine what it is to live with insofar as community? But this is the kind of responsibility that anarchism, that Islam, siyasat al-masuliyat, the politics of responsibility, runs by. It's not a politics of hukuk. It's not a politics of rights. You don't have rights until you know what your responsibility is to the land that you're polluting, that you're extracting oil and gas from, in order to run the machina that is your fancy Mercedes or your car or whatever else. You have a responsibility to the earth. You have a responsibility towards non-human life. You have a responsibility to the neighbor. You even have a responsibility to the enemy in terms of how you treat prisoners of war, in terms of a lot of different things, in terms of, this is why in Islam, rules of war, we were talking about jihad earlier, Allah is very clear. You do not destroy property. You do not destroy houses of worship, monasteries, mosques, synagogues. You don't kill, murder women, elderly, children, poor, destitute. You don't kill people in houses of worship. There are rules. In Christianity, those rules were laid down later by the churches. And that's a long history within itself that I talk about in the book. But in Islam, it was laid down immediately because there was no opportunity for misunderstanding. So it goes back to understanding fundamentally, what is our purpose? Is our purpose to dominate one another, to act in authoritarian ways towards one another? Because Allah says, we have created you from different tribes and nations so that you may get to know one another. And the best amongst you are those that exercise taqwa, piety. What is piety? Social justice. So again, competition can be good, but not in a way that is destructive. This is why we, again, build those ladder worlds, that we build the politics of hospitality, that we build the politics of disagreement, that we invest in jihad, if you will, in relationship to one another, and to struggle that way, but take responsibility then for one another. As opposed to what we presume of one another being the judge, the barometer, the caliber by which we destroy our own community. This is why it's just, I'll say this one last thing. It's very ironic that in the moment that we live in, It is Islam and so-called Islamists and so-called Mujahideen that are the ones that are the only ones actually that are standing up to imperialism and settler colonialism. And where's the left? When was the last time leftists did anything revolutionary or stood up to imperialism or colonialism where they are or elsewhere? I don't see China doing what Muslims are doing. I don't see Russia doing what Muslims are doing. Of course, they're part of also the world of the above. They may profess to be anti-imperialist, but they're more anti-American than they are anti-imperialist.
Mm.
So yeah, Russia's happy being a part of the world of the above, and it has its own ambitions, its own trajectory, and the same thing with China, absolutely. So yeah, it's a state form of capitalism, but it's capitalism nonetheless. Is it better or worse than the U.S.? I don't like to engage in these comparative juxtapositions. One is a naked totalitarianism. The one is an overt totalitarianism and fascism. They're both problematic in their own ways. So yeah, it's this is the irony of the moment we're talking about right now. And again, why anarchism has something to contribute, why Islam has something to contribute to the discourse.
And this is so powerful and so beautifully said. I mean, just to pick up on a couple of points to highlight them, how you just made sense of like basically praying 5 times as like a form of like should like deciding who leads prayer. It's like just to put it in like modern day terms, it's like practicing democracy 5 times instead of like practicing democracy once every 4 years, you know? That's
Mhm,
really
mhm.
beautifully said. And on another point that to pick up on earlier about how you said sometimes even like Marxist Leninist or like Orthodox Marxist or however one understand, like people on the left, how they see like the political project is managing the state to move it to like I don't know, a more civilized, more progressive form of capitalism or whatever, like a slow transition towards socialism, which as you and I and any person who is racialized, who's not even, I don't know, let's say had a political education or whatever, would tell you, yeah, our like one of our number one enemies is just the state. It's not, you know what I mean? The state is just,
Mm.
it's not even something political. It's something intuitive that you understand, right? I mean, you engage with it, at least, you know what I mean? It's something. So that's even a point that we're struggling with it as Black radicals because like you enter in
Mhm.
these left spaces and a lot of them try to do the exact same thing that you're saying, which is like, yeah, we need to have like enough people so that we can manage the state, so that we can get into parliament, so that we can apply laws. But in the first instance, like you said, the state and capitalism are, you know, basically partners in crime, let's say, or you know, and all these kinds of things. And so very beautifully, like I think we can go on like a deep dive into
Yeah.
this. And the last thing that you mentioned is so fantastic. I think I read a post of yours, I'm not too sure, which suggests that, or you're sort of suggesting to a theory of change about how basically what the resistance does, Muslim resistance, which fighting anti-imperialism, and you're absolutely right, like they're the only ones who are fighting imperialism in the world, or fighting like just as a matter of fact, a genocide and so on and so forth. How this precipitated an entire revival of even a left, an entire revival
Mhm.
of like left-wing politics. I would even go in so far as, even though you and I you and I disagree with the politics of Zoran Mamdani or whatever, I would go in so far as like his popularity wouldn't be the case if it wasn't for the resistance in Palestine, in Iran, in Yemen, in Lebanon, and so on and so forth. Even though they're a minority, usually we think about the theory of change as like in a majority, we need to get a lot of numbers. But actually, just to tie it up to something that you said, which is the jihad of the nafs, it shows you how strong your willingness to sacrifice the ego to commit to a greater good can basically create a sort of transformative moment of change. I think, um, yeah, maybe can you explain this a little bit to us because I find this
Yeah.
very fascinating.
So I want to go back. I'm going to work backwards because I think the last point and the first point is well, all of them are very interesting. And you're right. I do talk about this a fair bit, and I'll try and talk about it in different contexts because the more context that we're able to see how analysis plays out, the more that we have an understanding of then what the scope of the issues. This is not about changing operators because changing the operator does not alter the structure. Kwame Ture said there's a difference between mobilizing and organizing. Mobilizing is about issues, organizing is about structures. So what, again, are the structures that we're fighting? We have to name them. Is it just capitalism or is it just the nation state? Is it just Israel or is Israel an extension of the US? Is the US a crusading settler colony? Is the Israeli entity modeled on the US as opposed to Israel controlling the US, that we need to free Germany and we need to free the US, et cetera, and Britain? There's a lot of that talk from the Zionist entity, from the Zionist lobby, which is very historic, very, very historic. Zionist entity is a settler colony. Where did it get that model, that structure? It got it from the US. The US is a settler colony. It's the oldest settler colony that there is, 533 years old. Settler colonialism in 1492 then is not an event. It instituted a structure resting on anti-indigenous and anti-black foundations. Its foundations are based on the elimination of the native, elimination of the indigenous. So this is even further than South Africa. South African apartheid is not a useful analogy here. Why? Because even in the case of the Afrikaners, they wanted to preserve, they wanted to enslave people, black people, but they wanted black people on the plantation and them as the rulers, the plantation owners and rulers who whipped black people to work those plantations. They didn't want to genocide them because they needed them to work the population. So this is very also different. This is the thing. We need to be very precise as to what structures are we talking about. And so in the context of the US, in the context of Germany, let me ask this. In what world do leftists think that they're going to destroy or take over the state? A state is composed of state and corporations, are composed of prison to school industrial complexes, agrochemical industrial complexes, medical industrial complexes, pharmaceutical industrial complexes, military industrial complexes. In what delusion are you going to be able to dismantle all that or take it over? What words? Where has that happened and how can that? There is no theory and there can be no possibility for that. There's no room for that. So I want to then shift for a moment to the last that you mentioned. And this is an example that I hope elucidates what the problem is. Mamdani is ultimately a settler immigrant on Lenape territory. He ran for mayoral elections. He won the mayoral elections. And you're right. He won it by a pro-Palestinian crowd that supported him because he proclaimed himself to be pro-Palestinian, because he was critical of defunded police, because. What has Mamdani done since he won the election? He caved into the Zionist lobby. He started to condemn the Mujahideen and call Hamas terrorists. He started to say, no, we need more funding for police. In fact, his police commissioner is Jessica Tisch, who was responsible, and I know this because I was in Colombia, for, again, mobilizing the police forces alongside with Eric Adams, alongside with the other police commissioner, I forget his name, in order to get the students out of Hins Hall. Hins Hall was the hall or the building that was renamed after Hind Rajab, who was assassinated by Zionists, of over hundreds of bullets in her bodies as she was crying for help, a 10-year-old and 11-year-old. And this is Jessica Tisch, and she comes from one of the wealthiest Zionist families that exist in New York. So this is the supposed socialist DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, that is going to, this is the irony. And then Muslims come about and say, oh my God, we're so happy. Because again, what is New York? It's a metropolitan, urbanized. What is more that speaks to the epitome, the height of civilization, of progress, of the liberated, liberal, good citizen subject than you? It has it all. It's the representation of empire, it's capitalism, it's the representation of the immigrant dream. What dream come into effect? But it's either we believe that America is a nightmare, as Malcolm had called it, or it's a dream, it's a work in progress. So this is what happens when even you have an Uncle Tom like Mamdani comes to power. This is what you have when Obama comes to power. What has Mondad done? He's condemned Maduro and Venezuela as a dictatorship. The same thing with, now I have critiques of Venezuela, but I'm not, anyways. And the same thing with Cuba, and the same thing and the same thing. So what has he done that's so revolutionary? It's sad because he rode on board the revolutionary bandwagon, but anybody will do that. Because again, changing the operator you cannot and will not get into power and either be able to alter the structure while maintaining the same commitments that you maintain on the ground. You'll have to sell out on some level and some form, or you'll be assassinated. And there are many examples of that. But see, these didn't even cover the hallways and corridors of power. Malcolm didn't. Martin Luther King did it, and they were assassinated. Kwame Ture did it, and they were assassinated. The Panthers did it, and they were assassinated. They're the cracks. So this thinking that, oh, we're going to funnel and take over Congress, we're going to become senators, we're going to become mayors, we're going to alter. We have Butch Ware, the governor of New York, he's going on election. Tell me, the millions of dollars, the billions that went into Bernie Sanders, that went into the squad, that went into Ilhan Omar, that went. How many pieces of land could that have bought for us to repatriate it to indigenous people in the settler colony and to begin to work towards indigenous sovereignty and Black self-determination? How many breakfast programs, how many survival programs could that money have built? That is a constant reinvestment in the machine. Time, labor, energy, people canvassing, people knocking doors. Oh, look at the coalition that we're building. Okay, what is this coalition at best going to achieve? You're going to transform New York into a socialist state? Good luck with it. It's a very, but this is the lie. Again, this is the absence of a jihad al-akbar. This is the hypocrisy of, I want my cake and I want to eat it too. Look, it's and the sad reality is a lot of Muslims are involved with that. There are a lot of Muslims that are involved with that, and they say, oh, look, we're going to call it New Yorkistan. Ha, 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 ha. Well, so you are advocating for an Islamic colonization of already colonized land. Instead of, would you say the same thing with regards to Palestine? We have members of the Muslim Brotherhood, what's his name, Abbas Mansour, in the Knesset. We all know that he's traitor. He's in the Knesset. You have a member of the Muslim Brotherhood in the Knesset. Okay, is he not a traitor? We all know he's a traitor. But you see Ilhan Omar as a patriot. You don't see the irony in that? So Abbas Mansour is a traitor, and she's not a traitor. This is the problem. That people have bought into the hyphenated American identity because they bought into the dream. Look at Ilhan Omar. King Charles comes and visits and she's gleeful. She's so happy to take pictures of the king. Praise is towards Obama. When she was asked in 2 interviews, who are your favorite, who are your idols? Her name is Margaret Thatcher, the mother of neoliberalism. And Madeleine Albright, the architect of the Oil for Food program, and the millions that have been murdered of children that have been murdered in Iraq. Come on, this is the problem. Is that the people actually believe that this American dream exists? They hyphenate their names, and the Muslim American, the Arab American, the Sudanese American, the Somali American, the queer American, the this American. But who's the only person that doesn't hyphenate their name? It's the white American, because they're assumed to be a lot. This land belongs to indigenous people. So if you're advocating for land returning to Palestine and Palestinians, indigenous people, then you must be fighting and advocating for the same thing where you are. Again, the U.S. is leading this crusading war. The U.S. is a crusading settler colony. They are the modern day Romans. The crusades have not ended. The war on terror is an extension of those crusades. So again, I say all this because it's just like, do we know who we're fighting? Do we know who we're fighting? Suzanne Abu Halwa, other people sit down and say, well, again, the Zionists are the ones controlling America and Germany. It's just like, well, Meert's chancellor just said not even a year and a half ago, the Israeli entity is doing our dirty work. They're telling you. Are you kidding me? The settler colony that's 100 years old is the one that is controlling Europe, let alone America. But this is a way to cop out. This is a way to say, well, I want to be a good, German citizen, good Muslim German citizen. I just want to be accepted, within, Germany, their benevolent charity towards me and taking me in. And I want to prove to them that, not all Muslims are terrorists. The same thing in America. kind of logic. I want to prove to them that I could be a good member of parliament, I could be a good senator, I could be a good American who sends black and brown people to go and engage in imperialist war to civilize Africa and to kill black and brown men elsewhere. That kind of good American. So this is the irony of again the operator, and this is and the structure. And an operator will not be able to change a structure. No political party, not even the third party, Butch Ware and Jill Stein. Jill Stein, she's a Zionist. She believes in Israel. She believes in the Israeli project. What more do I need to know more than that? She's a settler of stolen land. Does she speak about that? No, she doesn't. Why should I even bother? The litmus test for Palestine is in relationship to 1492 because of, again, what happened in 1892. Why is 1492 so important? 1492 is so important because, again, we have to understand what we're fighting here. The US is a settler colony, and Palestine, it's a crusading settler colony. And Palestine, the litmus test, is only a litmus test insofar as what she speaks to in relationship to 1492. Why? Because Columbus, how did he end up on the shores of the Caribbean? He ended up there because he was going to India to gather riches, to fund the crusade to reclaim back Jerusalem, Palestine. He believed that the Messiah was going to come in his time. Like, this is what these societies are built on. This is the religious project that exists in the US. This is why, again, it's supporting Israelis and the Israeli entity and the Jewish supremacist entity, not because it loves Jews. They're the most anti-Semitic people that there is, white Europeans. They're the ones that invented anti-Semitism. But they're doing it for their own ulterior motivations that coincide with Jewish motivations, Jewish supremacist or Zionist supremacist motivations, which is, yeah, we want to bring the Messiah and we need to build the third temple. We only need to slaughter the red heifers. For the white European man, it's just like, we want to bring on the rapture. We want Jesus to come back. It's the same ultimate, it's a different ulterior motivations, but it's leading in an accelerationist way towards the same results, at least consequentially in the moment. So the question of, again, the purpose of life, of jihad, of what to do, because look, the Arab Spring, and this is the problem and limitation of the so-called Arab Spring, is that masses don't alter the condition of the world. Look at the masses that went out at Tahrir. Look at the masses that went out during the anti-war protests of Iraq and Afghanistan. Look at the masses of the Black Spring and Black Lives Matter. Did they change anything? No. No, because they didn't engage in the greater jihad and they didn't think about alternative ways of life beyond the nation state and capitalism. The Marxist-Leninists in Egypt, the revolutionary socialists, wanted to take over the state. Good luck with that project. The Egyptian military-industrial complex owns 50% of the Egyptian economy. In what world do you think? And the Muslim Brotherhood were the most organized force that existed to compete with the Egyptian military. And look what happened to them in 2013. They were slaughtered. And the Muslim Brotherhood, in the Rabaa al-Nahda, the two sit-ins that the Muslim Brotherhood had, Morsi was removed. He died in prison. And the entire Muslim Brotherhood are now in prison or have escaped. So this is the irony, right? Mass movements don't alter. And again, the Quran teaches, وَكَمْ مِنْ فِئَةٍ قَلِيلَةٍ, how many of a small group defeated a larger enemy? But the Quran says, prepare for them what is necessary in strength. Look what a couple of thousand mujahideen did in Gaza insofar as transforming the world. They destroyed the world of 1492. They exposed, there's no international law. There's no human rights. There's any of that. It was all smoke and mirrors. It was all a facade. There's no need to quote or rely on Francesca Albanese, who upholds international law, which is part of the Enlightenment project, which is part of the modern project. It's all a facade. So, and that's what they did. They took the mirror of 1492 and they smashed it on the floor. And now we have to all deal with the fact that we're never going to be able to piece that mirror again. And why should we? And deal with the jagged and rough edges of that mirror until we are able to share more than we can spare in Gaza, towards Gaza. There is no liberating Palestine. There is no liberating Palestine without the liberation of Turtle Island. That way, the US and Canada, they are settler colonies and they are the ones leading this. But again, so the question of, if you want to stop imperialism and the war on Iran, and this is what I have a problem with insofar as all these anti-imperialist Marxists and anarchists, is you either have these anti-imperialists sitting down and clapping on the sidelines for bombs dropping over Tel Aviv and Haifa, okay, great. And you're sitting on the sidelines, you're doing nothing. Or they're like Anti-imperialism, anti-imperialism. Okay, well, the engine and fuel for imperialism is settler colonialism. You're in the imperial core and you're not doing anything. You're not destroying the source of imperialism. You want to preserve it. You want Madani. That's what you want. You want Bushware. That's what you want. Instead of destroying, if you have a problem with imperialism, why aren't you destroying the source of imperialism that has ravaged and wreaked havoc upon the globe for over 533 years, internally and externally? It makes no sense to me. But it's an easy way to say, oh, I want my cake and have it too. So this is what, if one studies the Mujahideen, this is one is getting. One is learning that, oh, a few thousand, the Black Panthers weren't large in numbers. The Zapatistas were not large in numbers. Why do I remember the Panthers? Because despite the fact that they were small, look at the legacy that they left, because they built alternatives, because they didn't want to change things from within, because they didn't care about the nation state. They declared war against the American states. Declared war. Where do you see that happen? We're so far behind. The Zapatistas declared war in 1994 on the Mexican state because they understand this is a settler state that oppresses indigenous people. So this is, and they planned all these movements, plans for decades. Fana al-Aqsa was planned over 20 years. The Panthers planned over years. The Zapatistas, 10 years, they're planning in the Lacandana jungle. Women's revolutionary laws, they're building alternatives, alternative schools, alternative hospitals, alternative this. If you want to convince somebody of being a revolutionary alternative way of life, what way better than to build? They don't want to build. Look at these academics that are complaining, oh my God, lack of freedom of speech, oh my God, the Palestine exception, oh my God. It's just like, we've long known the limits of the academy. But instead, you're wailing, you're writing more journal articles, more books, more, doing more interviews, more podcasts, or how bad the economy the economy is, instead of divesting from. Why don't you divest? Why don't you leave it? Why don't you burn it? It's an extension of the settler state. Was knowledge meant to be compartmentalized, hierarchized that way? Physics separate from chemistry, separate from biology, separate from gender studies, separate from Black studies, separate from. We all know that our knowledge systems are not built that way. They're interdisciplinary. But this is the way that the white European man, capitalism, sought to make knowledge palatable, commodifiable, so that you go to university, you get a job, you get a degree, you get a job, you get a house, you get a car, you have some kids, then you die, which is expensive too. And if you're lucky, before that, you get to sit on your porch and drink lemonade and watch your grandkids on the swing, if you're lucky. But that's broke that world. And the choice is, what do we have to do? Why were the encampments so dangerous? Because they exposed the fact that academics don't care about the students, because people like Mahmoud, like Zohran Hamdani's father, Mahmoud Hamdani, and other faculty, I can assure you, because I was there, they came because they were more or less coerced into it. And when they came, they really didn't do much, say from time to time. But yeah, they didn't plan this with the students. I was very grateful to be honored to be a part of that journey from the beginning. But now they want to write books on the encampment because they're supposed expertise. But what made the encampment so incredible? Because the students were imagining a different way of life. The students were youth, and youth have a very wild imagination. They're not constrained by, what is possible and what is impossible. They were having more conversations and discussions over what interlinks our struggles and how Sudan and Congo relate to Palestine and etc. in 1492 than they were in a classroom. They were getting to know one another for the first time. They were beginning to live together for the first time in tents, manage their own food, manage the trash, manage this. I wanted to start a vegetable garden there because it's just like, hey, if you're doing this, then you need to start being self-sustainable. You can't just have ammos and aunties and uncles get you halal food from restaurants. That's also a waste of resources and money. Go use that money towards establishing a social center. Go buy a building. Establish a community cooperative, a workers' cooperative. Do something. Build something. Build an alternative survival program. Right? But anyways. This is what made him dangerous, because they weren't just fighting Columbia University, they were fighting the settler state. And this is why the National Guard almost had to be called in. This is the thing, right? It's just like these academies, these institutions need to be destroyed and alternatives need to be built. in their replacement. They need to be divested in from. When I say I want to defeat capitalism, how? Again, like how? Because if I go and engage in a Palestine action, which is great, tactical tactic, to go destroy an arms manufacturer, okay, wonderful. But the arms manufacturer is not going to bat an eye. They're going to go establish another factory elsewhere, and they're still making billions of dollars because war is very profitable. And we can delude ourselves. I'm not saying don't do these kinds of actions. These are the most valiant, courageous actions, especially by you, but they're a tactic. They're not a strategy. If I say I'm going to defeat capitalism, okay, how? I don't know how to grow my own food. I don't know how to live on the land. I don't know how to feed myself, my family, my community. Wouldn't it hence be more useful for me to, again, take the resources with the community, take the resources I was going to pay towards Montana, pool it with others, buy a piece of land, remunerate it to indigenous people, put it in a land trust, and begin to grow our own food autonomously? Can capitalism do anything about that? No, not in the short term. Will they be pissed in the long term? Absolutely. What made the Panthers dangerous was the breakfast programs. That's when Hoover said, "You're terrorists," because it's empowering themselves. It's the means of autonomy, their own autonomy, being taken into their own hands. It's just like, we don't need you. We don't need you police. We're gonna protect our communities. We're armed. We're gonna resolve our differences. We're gonna feed our people. We don't want anything from you. We're not gonna be dogs chasing a car anymore. That's it, it's over. But this is why understanding who the enemy is. In Tahrir during the 18 days, did people take control of their own communities? Yes, absolutely. And established the Lajana Shabi. The same thing happened in Sudan. Yes, yes, yes. But then, of course, there were power forces locally and regionally that took it over. But why? Because the people themselves did not want to continue this. The people themselves did not want to engage with the greater jihad. The people themselves had stereotypes of either I have to align myself with a military dictatorship or an Islam of the above Muslim Brotherhood that wants capitalism, that will be beholden to the Arab Gulf, that will be good allies to the Americans, that will not be anti-imperialist, that will not be anti-Zionist, the Muslim Brotherhood. But not that Burhan is Muslim Brotherhood, but that's the way that he's depicted. But this is the thing. Sudan didn't learn from Egypt. Eden didn't learn from Tunis. Nobody learned from anybody else. And then Syria and Libya, well, you see what the consequences are. You see it now in Sudan. What happens when all hell breaks loose? Because there is no political project. The military, in the case of Egypt, what do you think? You want to go down that road? And it's just like, okay, everybody shut up. You're going to accept. And this is the example now that's being held for Arabs and Muslims. If you don't want to be Syria, if you don't want to be Libya, you have to accept the way that things are right. That's it. And people now are wishing for the days of Mubarak. So this is the, again, I'll never forget being in Tahrir and a lot of prominent activists. We will show the world, we will show, we will do. Okay, be humble, learn from the Zapatistas, learn from the Panthers, learn from others. But no. The problem, my dear, then is a problem. It's an existential problem. It is a spiritual problem. It is an ethical, political problem. It is a problem of modernity. It is mixing up where you Arabs were slave traders, no different than Europeans. It's a crisis of language. It's really a crisis of language, because English itself, which is the dominant hegemonic language in the world, operates via euphemisms. You have euphemisms like, defensive war. What the hell is like a defensive war, right? In the context of in which the imperialists use it, or you have the war on terror. You have simulated drowning, which is really torture, right? That's the world by which we operate civilian casualties are called casualties of war. I mean, it's the problem of language. We don't know what anarchism means. We don't know what Islam means. And I'm saying this to both Muslims and anarchists. I'm saying this to all kinds of people, right? It's a crisis because there's no ijtihad and there's no greater jihad.
To make sense of it, so you have a leftist project that sees its success in basically taking over the state, to go back to what we said earlier, or firstly. And I think once you're committed to that project, something happens in your mind then you have a commitment to that project, as if like, you know what you're saying, the hyphenated American, right? Like you're like, okay, if that's the commitment that I have to that project, then necessarily like this American, this German good citizen, this integration logic, it has to take root into what I believe as my subject or as my being is. Um, and even on the left, this is like a political project, right? Like, this is how we're going to change things. And so you sort of become an apologetic or an apologia towards like settler colony, towards like imperialism, towards like even like the violence of the state against the racialized and so on. And you
Mhm.
become like, you sort of naturalize these. And you see it today, for example, where we're in a schizophrenic moment where, like you said, what the revolutionaries have done, or the Mujahideen have done, has mobilized millions across the world.
Mhm.
But what I'm actually, what we're in Germany here have struggling with the mobilizing of these millions, even here in Germany, right? Like we've constantly been told like this, the German guilt stops people from like being pro-Palestinian, all that kind of nonsense. But actually, the youth here in Germany, like so enthusiastically, they come to this
Mhm.
conclusion, like, well, actually, what the revolutionaries have shown us is that this international world order, this human rights, this blah blah blah. These are privileges. These definitely don't
Mhm.
even extend to all citizens in our own state, and all this like freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom self-determine. It's just basically nonsense and all these kinds of. So this is the best example of it. And then when we see this manifestly today, which is when they come to organize in traditionally left spaces, because these left spaces have accepted that we're going to do it through the state. So we sort of naturalize these
Mhm.
logics of capital and of the state and nation states and stuff like this. They are so disappointed. They're
Mhm.
so disappointed because, man, like it's shown us people have sacrificed their life to literally show us what the fuck is wrong with, sorry for my language, but what the hell is wrong with this world, only for me to want to mobilize. And then when I get into these like situations, these punks basically still believe in like a a project that in front of our eyes is like decaying. It's like the masks are off. At least this is the moment that we see today. And I think what I understand from what you say is, I think the problem with the institution, or not institutional, but like the traditional left, is that they haven't gone into like a greater jihad. And I think you hint at it, which is basically that how can you even rationally, reasonable, how can you reasonably believe that it just requires me to take hold of the state so I can change
Mhm.
everything? This
Mhm.
is not a fantasy. This is a delusion.
Mhm.
This. I don't want to be disparaging or whatever, but this is
Mhm.
somewhat like an illusory vision, and also it's psychosis.
Mhm.
It's really a confused position. Like, I had to say it just so, so I can make
Yeah,
sense.
yeah, no. Of course, if I may add just as a minor brief points on that. This goes to a fundamental problem, which is we didn't talk about it, but it's maybe inshallah worth exploring, or maybe we talked about it in the other recording of Islamophobia being
Ah,
the centerfold and being the foundation of modernity. This is why a lot of leftists struggle, young and old, struggle because it's just like, okay, we want to support Gaza and the Mujahideen, but there also has to be like limits because Islam, because did they rape? Did they really behead? Did they commit war crimes? Sort of thing. Okay, they can fight, but it has to be within the limits of international law. This sort of a thing. ICG tribunals. And then now you have Iran. It's just like, oh, this is getting out of hand. Iran is a quote unquote authoritarian regime. Iran is so bad, regime change there. How can we hold both at the same time? And it's just like,
mm,
this is the difference of strategy and tactic. It's just like there are many things that one can sit down and discuss with regards to Iran, and that is a whole like I could literally teach entire courses on that
mm,
from 1979, prior to 1979, was up there. What Khomeini's project is from a revolutionary perspective and anti-colonial perspective, the way that it was succeeding, the way that there were shortcomings given the state structures, wilayat al-faqih, that he developed as a theory, its limitations, Islamist debates, because this has been a huge thing within even Muslim debates. Can we achieve the Ummah through the nation state? This is the big discussion. Big discussion. Some said yes, some said no. When this goes to Qutb, said Qutb, this goes to Hassan al-Banna, this goes to Fazl al-Rahman, Iqbal, Mawdudi, to Muhammad Rashid Rida. There are so many. And it goes to the question of even authority or leadership in Islam, given the concept of the caliphate, which is a make-believe concept. I talk about it in the book, as you know, because it's not an incumbent concept, and it's a governing system that developed after the Prophet's death. And I say I reject it because sovereignty lies in the Ummah, and we are all caliphs, etc. But again, the problem of Islamophobia is central. And sadly, we have Arab normalizing Zionist regimes like the UAE that are contributing to it because they're anti-Muslim Brotherhood, because they're anti-Islam, really. Right? But this is the Islam and to the right, the above kind of logic, right? Versus Islam, like I said, of the above and to the left, anti-imperialist, anti-colonial like Iran, and Islam of the below and to the left, like Ansarullah, like Islamic Jihad, like Al-Qassam, that they're not fighting for a Palestinian state, they're fighting for an Oman. You have the Islam of the below and to the right, like Al-Qaeda, like ISIS, like Daesh. But it's been a huge debate, but one that has affected, obviously emerges out of, but also affected the taboo of Islamophobia, and why the moment the Al-Qassam or Islam come up, immediately the image of mullahs, of bearded men, yelling Allahu Akbar comes into the mind of leftists. Oh, what are you going to do with queer people? What are you going to do so far as women? Because Islam oppresses women, oppresses queer people. This is part of the Orientalist narrative. Muslims are exceptionally anti-queer, exceptionally sexist, exceptionally misogynist, exceptionally racist, blah, blah, blah. This is part of what informs leftist discourse insofar as, sadly, insofar as the left. It even affects Afro-pessimism. People like, Frank Wilderson's, the Afro-pessimistic takes as well, right? Arabs are exceptionally anti-black, right? So again, there's a lot that I could say there, but I just wanted to address this element of Islamophobia as a hindrance. And I also wanted to say that, you also have the regime change, hence leftists, right? It's not just the leftists that want to take over the state, it's the regime change. It's like, I want change everywhere, but I don't want to do what I need to do where I am at. This is what I'm saying. Like, people are choosing not to act locally. Yeah, we're inspired by Palestine. What does that demand of you to act locally? That demands that you destroy the German state. You destroy the American state. You destroy the French state. Just to put it very bluntly, it demands, I believe in an Islam that hates America. This is how far that goes, not to try and preserve it and have your cake, right? And an alternative mode of life. So it's that serious. It's that serious because, and I'll say this, if we are waiting for a revolution to happen, then we talked about the fallacy of mass movements, of the working class, quote unquote, struggle because there is no monolithic working class, blah, blah, blah. Or subjectivity, working class subjectivity, depends on who we are, what race, what background, what that affects the category of the working class. But anyways, then we need to also give weight to not everything is known in the context of revolutions. And what I mean by that is that our mujahideen relied also, this is the importance of spirituality, on the concept of al-ghayb that I spoke about before. That Allah, that Mother Earth, say whatever we want to say, call her whatever we want to call her, has something to teach us with regards to our own significance, with regards to how to relate to them. Because look, we're not going back to 1492. Turtle Island is not the same anymore. The land has changed. Different vegetation, different plants are grown elsewhere in the world because of modernity and colonialism and so on. So we need to learn how to walk with the land as opposed to on it. So, and that is the role of al-ghayb. Are there things that we learn from revolutions? Absolutely, because we've gone through so many experiments of them. So we know that there are certain things that are needed. You know that there is a need that a population engage in a jihad al-akbar, in the greater jihad. You know that you need to develop alternatives. But there are things that will always be unknown. That is left for our Mother Earth, the world, something spiritual, something beyond us to teach us. So we don't necessarily have all the solutions. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't start, or that we don't have enough to cause cataclysmic change now. And I say this because, again, the state, for two reasons, and then I'll stop. Because the state is not this abstract entity that exists over and above us. Again, the state teaches us how to govern each other. We enact statehood every single day in relationship to logics that we've internalized from the state with respect to one another. Like I said, see somebody who's black, okay, I know how to codify you. You're male, I know how to codify you. You're queer, you're this and that. I know how to control you. I know how to discipline you. I know how to monitor. I know how to survey you. I know how to keep you in check. Leftists keep Muslim in check insofar as their Islamophobia all the time, right? And so many people keep so many other people in check. Men keep women in check, blah, 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 blah. Heterosexuals keep queers in check, like all the time, right? So that is the enactment of statehood all the time in our horizontalist dynamics, not just vertical, but horizontal dynamics. But we are in a very urgent moment, and it's really a moment of emergency. And this is the thing that God knows best, talk about the unknown, but I don't think we have years. I don't think we have 10 years. I think, again, if we're taking seriously what is unfolding in the world right now, because there are prophecies that are coming to fruition. Jesus coming back, Mahdi, who is a figure also within Islam, Muslim astrology, Muslim prophecies is supposed to show up, the Antichrist. This is very serious. This is not hypothesis, if you will, or just theory. And even if one doesn't believe in any of it, there are billions in the world that do. And one would be very foolish not to take their prophecies very, very serious. I believe the old world is done. It's dead. It's not only dying, it was always a facade. But a new world, its birth pangs are being born. And what's scary is that people are really not prepared for what's coming. And I'm talking about the majority of people on this planet are really not prepared. The apocalypse has already begun on many places in Sudan. You know this. In Palestine and the Congo. It's already there. It's already manifesting. So yeah, it's really urgent that people act now. I don't think that we have time to fool around. So that's just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. I think what I'm going to take away from this conversation, for me personally, is no more of just this tomfoolery of waiting for the state to take over the state, but we need to act now. And in order for us to act now, we need to have this, the greater jihad. With that, Professor Mohammed, is there something that you want to include or add?
No, Jazakallah khair. Thank you. I know this was another beautiful, I think the other conversation was 2 hours. I think we were sort of broaching that. It really is an honor, Mohammed, and I'm very grateful for the work that you and Black Radicals are doing. Please, I keep doing the important work. It is a form of jihad. There's no doubt about it. And I'm really looking forward to building with you and those who cross your path or those who are part of your community now. So thank you very much for this opportunity. And yeah.